doubt. We all have it. But what do we do with it? Maybe you were raised as a Christian, but you haven't darkened the door of a church building in quite some time. Maybe you had a painful experience that makes trusting in God just seem so inadequate. Maybe you've read and studied your way out of and you feel like you've grown past religion and its claims. I want to invite you to join us on a journey as we ask the question, is faith credible? A meaningful faith is one that is worthy of our examination, our trust, and answers the deepest longings of our heart. Skeptics, doubters, seekers are welcome as we ask this big question. We don't have all the answers, but we know the one who does. Join us on this walk as we search for a worthy faith.
Good morning. Is this all there is? It was 1969 when Peggy Lee walked into a recording studio and recorded what became one of her major hit songs. She goes through verses about what seemed like grand events in her life, going to the circus as a kid, falling in love. And every one of them seemed so grand, and then they ended, and there was something missing, something left behind, something that made her feel like it wasn't what it promised it would be. And every verse leads to this chorus. Is that all there is? Is that all there is? If that's all there is, then let's keep dancing. Break out the booze and have a ball. If that's all there is. Look around. What was billed at the time as our summer of discontent has now lasted decades. And right as we got to the turn of the century, and we thought maybe hope was right around the corner, then we began to do some studies, and we discovered 14, 15 years after the turn of the century, the suicide rate had gone up 24%. And the reason why, Harvard public policy professor answered, the reason is obvious. Hopelessness is the order of the day. You realize we are the most advanced civilization in the history of the world. Think about how you got to church this morning. The chief mode of transportation 200 years ago was the same as it was 2,000 years ago. In 2 centuries, we've gone from horseback to rocket ship. There is more technology in your phone than there was that took the men to the moon. We have more self-help books. We have more access to more knowledge than ever before. Their average person has access to more information than experts did not that long ago. And what's the result? We are more emotionally drained. We are more sick. We are more tired. We are more confused in a society that looks as if it is coming apart at the seams. What do we do about it? Peggy Lee said, live it up and have a ball because this is all there is. The ancient philosopher Epicurus, who started Epicureanism, this love of pleasure, said the same thing. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And the ancient writer of Ecclesiastes looks through the same lens and says, really enjoy life with your spouse when you're young, because you know what you have to look forward to? Nothing. It's meaningless. And this is where the story takes a dramatic turn. Listen to the top songs of each generation. And oftentimes, you'll hear songs that at first sound just like what I just said. I mean, when Green Day recorded their song, Boulevard of Broken Dreams, you hear this statement of hopelessness. I walk alone. My shadow's the only thing that walks beside me. But you keep listening, and you'll hear a cry of the heart for something more. Sometimes I wish someone would find me. Hopelessness is what it sounds like when you start listening, for example, to Whatever song comes up in your generation, I'm thinking of Harry Styles, who says it seems like life is just simply being stuck in dodging bullets, but you keep listening. And he says, we got to get out of here. We got to get away from here. We got to meet somewhere far away from here. And I think maybe the best illustration of this conflicted message in our society is U2's song, where Bono says, look, I have climbed the highest mountains, and I've run through the fields. I have crawled and I have scaled city walls, but I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Hope, peace, contentment. It's what we long for. It's what we want more than anything. Even when we admit it doesn't seem to be available in our world, we long for it. But we don't just want somebody to give us a wish fulfillment, some pipe dream that says, here, this will give you some sense of hope, but it's not real or true or meaningful or just. We don't want that. There are signposts along the way that have to be met for real hope, for real peace, for real contentment. We don't see it in this world, but we want it. Now, what if I told you that the God I meet in Jesus Christ offers exactly what I'm talking about? What if I told you that in just 10 words, Jesus packs in an offer to give you the deepest longings of your heart? And that's where I want to start. It's in John 14 and verse 6. When Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. In a world of plastic people and fading dreams, we long for something real. And Jesus says, I am. Philosophers will tell you the most basic question in existence is, why is there something rather than nothing? But even that assumes that we agree that there's something real, something crying out for an explanation. There have been people, believe it or not, in history who thought that there is no such thing as anything real. In philosophy, they're called solipsists. They would teach that right now you are all a figment of my imagination. Would make what I'm doing much easier. These people write books, never bestsellers, go figure. They drive cars, they get married. By the way, what's the best pickup line for a solipsist? You are the girl of my dreams. So, these are people who say this is all fake. But I'll tell you, when a solipsist is standing in the middle of the road and a car is bearing down on them, they don't ponder the non-existence of the car. They get out of the way because we can't live that way. You know, there are religions that will teach you that what you feel deep down that you call pain or suffering or anxiety isn't real. What you have to learn is to somehow get yourself to kind of forget those things and act as if they're not real and to live in this make-believe world. But our experience tells us otherwise. We see things in this world that aren't right and we don't say, well, good thing isn't actually happening. We long for it to be better because we believe in something real. How do you explain? You can maybe say that somebody will do something good for somebody else because it makes me feel good about myself. Do something good for you. But how do you explain the army private who jumps on the grenade to save everybody around unless it's that deep down we think that what we do in this life really matters? Reality may be something for us not to take for granted. In the late 70s, a guy named Robert Nozick wrote a book, and he talked about what he called the experience machine. Now, he said, imagine that I had this machine, and I could plug you into it. And as soon as I plug you into it, you fall into a deep, deep, deep sleep. Have you ever had a sleep where you dreamed, and the dream felt more real than anything you've ever dreamed before? And when you wake up, you have to pinch yourself to say, wait a second, that just felt so real. Well, this is a machine that make you fall into a dream state, and it is more of a dream than you've ever had before. And in this dream state, you can have everything you've ever wanted. You name it. You always want to write that groundbreaking, best-selling novel. In this dream, you've done it. You love your family. It's Thanksgiving all the time. You can't stand your family. They never call. It's whatever you want. And it feels more real than reality does. One catch. You can never get out. So your actual family is going to mourn your loss. But you won't know about it. Would you do it? This has been asked over and over again in place after place for years. And overall, 4 out of 5 people say, 4 out of 5 say no. And why is that? Because deep down, we're even willing to go through suffering and difficulty and tragedy, the highs and the lows of life. We want what we experience to be real, even more than a make-believe happiness. In 2002, Johnny Cash sang a cover of a song that predated him called Hurt. And the first 4 lines, I hurt myself today to see if I still feel. I focus on the pain, the only thing that's real. We long for something real. And Jesus says, I know that. I accept that. And I am. This is no pipe dream, no wish fulfillment. The God we meet in Jesus will not deny or run from reality. He wants to make sense of it. In a world full of atrocities and unfairness, we long for proper rules of fairness and procedure, a standard of right by which we can judge all things. We long for justice. And Jesus says, I am the way. For most of our lifetime, I'd say from the 60s to the turn of the century, we were being told, baby boomers, this is your generation. We were being told that universals are mundane and impersonal. We were told by literary scholars that the author is dead, the meta-narrative is gone. This idea that we can figure out some ultimate reality that's right for everyone all the time just isn't the case. It holds back the creative spirit. Our culture's movement towards denying objectivity, denying universals, raising the value of perspective and circumstance over any shared values, led to more and more hung juries, and generations increasingly incapable of making moral distinctions. It was in the textbooks. J.L. Mackie, the Oxford professor, wrote the standard textbook called Ethics. Listen to the subtitle, Inventing Right and Wrong, and said science does not prove that objective moral facts exist, so we shouldn't go around believing that they do. But our experience tells us otherwise. In the late 1970s, there was a debate that took place between an atheist named Anthony Flew and a Christian philosopher by the name of Thomas Warren. And before that debate, Thomas Warren gave Anthony Flew 3 questions. The first question: is there an objective standard of right and wrong that transcends time and place? Well, Anthony Flew, being a good atheist, said no. Second question: when the Nazis put little kids in boxcars coated with quicklime so they wouldn't just die, but they'd die a slow, burning, agonizing death, was that wrong? Anthony Flew actually was in the British Air Force, saw this firsthand. Being a good man, he said, yes, that was wrong. Question number 3. What law did they violate? You know, you're supposed to obey the law of the land. The law in Germany at the time was obey the Führer. If I'm driving my car on the right side of the road in England, and I get stopped, and they say you broke the law, I'd say, oh no, here's my American driving manual. You might as well read it and get used to it. This is how you're supposed to drive, on the right side of the road, in both senses of the word. And they'd say, no, here you would drive on the left-hand side of the road, and you're supposed to obey our laws. We're not under American jurisdiction. What law did the Nazis violate? There was not the law of the land to disobey the Fuhrer. There was no such thing that we know of as the International Law of Rights. So what law did they violate? He filled in a box that said, see Nuremberg, a higher law. Turns out Nuremberg is where we tried the Nazis for war crimes. And isn't it interesting that the chief prosecuting attorney at Nuremberg, Judge Robert Jackson, gave a closing speech in which he said, here is the reason that we can judge the Nazis for being wrong. There is a higher law that transcends time and place. Do you see the argument? Without some standard that overarches, that goes beyond any particular group's claim to its rights, how can you ever stand in judgment against somebody else in a different civilization with a different set of values? How can you ever say what's right for me must also be right for you, unless there's a standard that extends and goes beyond them all? But that standard must be something to which or to whom we are all accountable. The message seems to have gotten through, at least part of it. Our cultural moment has shifted. Some have said that postmodernism, whatever that meant, is no longer the case. Maybe you've seen signs that relativism is no longer the order of the day. There's a new, strident fundamentalism in its place, in which even the non-religious have created their own morality code, and your disagreement or your disapproval of their list marks you as evil. Rooted in things like freedom and dignity, they rightly point out that abuse should not be tolerated. And then they go on to define any cramping of anyone's personal choice falls into the same category. But what in the world can justify sacred truths like human equality or personal autonomy or the language of rights? What we're seeing in our world today is proof positive that we don't just want moral awareness. We long for a sense of moral duty, that you must believe the same way I do. That's the only way we can live together. There you have it. Our longing for justice comes full circle. There can't just be my way and your way. It doesn't work. There's got to be the way. The only problem is that atheism and agnosticism, it can produce very moral people. I've known some non-believers who are more moral than some believers. I don't doubt that. What I doubt is that the philosophy to which they cling offers any reason to be so. There's no such thing as moral obligation without a standard that goes beyond time and place. Our deepest sensibilities long for justice, and we want to know what is the real meaning of it all. And the God we see in Jesus says, I am that test of justice. I am that standard of righteousness. I am the way. In a world full of lies and make-believe fairy tales, we long for truth. And Jesus says, I am the truth. Nietzsche didn't think so. He said, truth is dead, and when truth is dead, all that's left is manipulation and power games. Whoever can appeal to the sensitivities of the jury, they win. This fundamental truth, one side just may be right, regardless of how emotionally charged appeals to the contrary are, thrown out of court. And it turns out that the more that we've discovered in our life, the explosion of technology has just made us all aware of so many options. We have FOMO, the fear of missing out, and it means that we have a very hard time making decisions. We don't just have different cereals in our box, we have different faiths. We're conversion prone, says Peter Berger, always thinking about the thing we could have chosen rather than relishing the one we did choose. And that's why you'll hear pop songs singing, "Let's pick the truth that we believe in." Your truth is as good as my truth. Our experience says otherwise. We can't live this way. Without truth, everything reduces to power games and manipulation. But that means, if you follow its logic, that while you scream for your right, you scream for your right, you scream for your right, guess what? There is no longer any such thing as an inalienable right. All that's left is my claim versus your claim. Power games. There are lots of charters all over the world declaring human equality. I'm a fan of it. Big fan of it. The International Declaration of Human Rights that came out of World War II begins first line. We believe that all humans are born free and equal in dignity and worth. That's a beautiful line. It has absolutely zero foundation. We believe. Isn't that great? That's going to stop people from breaking that code, isn't it? It's true that you can poke at America's founding fathers. They weren't perfect. All kinds of ways in which they argued for less than they should have or did less than they argued for. But it's not a coincidence that they thought inalienable rights have to be grounded in something higher and better. And so they said that these inalienable rights of life and liberty were given to us by our Creator. You have to have a foundation. Something beyond, I sure would like it to be true. Did you know that freedom requires truth? Think about this. You want to liberate animals. You want to liberate animals. They're in cages and you want to set them free. There's a lion in one cage. There's a camel in one cage. There's a tiger in the other cage. And you want to set them free. You know that setting them free does not mean taking the hump off the camel or taking the stripes off the tiger. Setting them free has to start with knowing what they are in truth. You have to know what something truly is in order to set it truly free. Freedom requires truth. We know it. We know it. Let's engage in a thought experiment to prove this is true. We'll call it the Maury Povich experiment. So sorry that so many of you young ones have no idea who Maury Povich is. He provided hours and hours of useless entertainment. Suppose that you're happily married, and I hand you an envelope. And I say, in this envelope is absolute 100% proof whether your spouse has ever cheated on you. Now remember, you're happily married. And the notion that my spouse has always been faithful to me has helped make a great marriage. But in this envelope, I know for certain, lie detector test and everything, if your spouse has ever been unfaithful, would you open the envelope? Students are asked this over and over again. Now, students may not be fair. They're not married yet. But you go asking people all over the place, would you open it? And wouldn't you know it, the vast majority say, yes. No amount of pleasure will satisfy our deepest longings. We will stand cold, naked, and alone, face to face, with a nagging feeling that what we find pleasing can never measure up to what we find to be true. And Jesus says, I am the truth. And finally, in a shallow culture that takes pride in glamorizing senseless activities, we long for meaning. And Jesus says, I am the truth. It may be the most famous question ever asked. What is the meaning of life? But to even ask that question assumes that meaning and value are sensible topics. Thomas Nagel wrote a book called What Does It All Mean? It's a little short book meant to introduce undergraduates to philosophy. And in that book, he says, the whole idea of looking for meaning is a complete waste of time. Do you know what you have to look forward to? The grave. So why make things miserable trying to find some ultimate purpose? My favorite quote along this line is from Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell was a brilliant philosopher and mathematician at Cambridge in the 1940s. And he gave a speech called A Free Man's Worship. And trying to be a very consistent atheist, he said, everything that you do in this life eventually is going to mean nothing. The greatest things you ever experience in this life will mean nothing. The greatest acts of heroism you've ever heard of eventually will be nothing. It'll be lost in the oblivion of the heat death of the universe. And so, only on this truth, quote, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair can the soul's habitation be firmly built, end quote. He was borrowing from Ecclesiastes. So was Kansas. When they said, all we are, it's dust in the wind. But our experience says otherwise. First of all, we don't want to live this way. In survey after survey across the globe, when asked, do you ponder or think about the meaning of life? 75% of people say, yes, I do. Not only do we not want to live this way, we don't live this way. Did you know that when a nursing home brings in, for example, parakeets and robins and hens, you'll find that people begin to act better and live better, and life seems to go better. In one particular place, the use of drugs fell 35%. The rate of death fell 15%. And when they asked the guy in charge, why did this change result in the way that it did? The doctor who persuaded the nursing home to make its change said this, I believe the difference in death rates can be traced to the fundamental human need for a reason to live. We all seek a cause beyond ourselves. Viktor Frankl was a neuroscientist who was in the concentration camps. And during and after, he began to develop a new theory called logotherapy because he noticed what was it that caused some people to survive in the greatest atrocities they've ever experienced. And the answer is real sense of purpose. I began the sermon by referring to Peggy Lee. When she gets to her final verse, she says this, I know what you must be saying to yourselves. If that's the way she feels about it, why doesn't she just end it all? Oh, no, not me. I'm not ready for that final disappointment. Because I know just as well as I'm standing here talking to you that when that final moment comes and I'm breathing my last breath, I'll be saying to myself, is that all there is? What do you think? Will you hold to the firm foundation of unyielding despair? Or will you hold to God's unchanging hand? When you long for something real and true and meaningful, and you look around at a world that doesn't seem to offer it, but every one of us knows that we want it, won't you consider the claim that the God I meet in Jesus Christ is the very foundation of all the things my soul desperately needs, and that longing that your soul has, God gave it to you. It's a homing beacon, crying out for God, and my God is running to you. He stands here this morning with his arms open wide. He stands there every morning. Yes, he's at church. He's also at the foot of your bed. He's in the back seat at your date. He's also with you when you're studying. He's with you when you're hurting. He's with you when you're crying, at every moment, at every place. Where can I go from your spirit? David says, I can't go anywhere. You are there. And my God wants you so desperately to be with him. He gave his son to die so that you'll be with him. The deepest longings of your heart won't be met anywhere else but in Christ.
Thank you for joining us. I hope you've been encouraged. I hope you've been enriched. And if you have any questions, any thoughts, any comments, reach out to us at prayers@wschurch.net. God bless you. Tune in next week.